Good evening, Professor. This is Burck, and today I will be diving into a relatively controversial topic. And my title for this presentation is Navigating the Highs and Lows, Addressing the Impacts of Cannabis Through Policy and Advocacy. To get started, these are the key points that I will be covering. What is cannabis, how it's used, the history of cannabis legalization, the direct and indirect impacts of cannabis use, and the service gaps we're facing and what's missing. And lastly, my vision for change and along with some policy proposals. So what is cannabis? Cannabis is more commonly known as marijuana, weed, joints. It comes in many forms. It's usually used into food items like edibles and brownies and cookies. People are getting real creative nowadays. But my target demographics are young adults from the age 20 to 29 who are most likely to use cannabis and also use cannabis the most frequently. And then moving to ethnicities, American Indians, and Alaska Natives, Black or African Americans are also more likely to use cannabis, along with people with a lower education level and lower income or unemployed. Those populations are also more likely to use cannabis. Here's a visual representation of the history of cannabis legalization. Over 18 states, I believe, have legalized cannabis in the U.S. And this kind of drug policy change hasn't been seen since the Prohibition in 1932. And you know, all the more to talk about. But why? Why is it so popular? People who are supporting legalizing cannabis argue that it improves, personal well-being. It lowers the likelihood of someone being criminalized with, possessing cannabis, as well as it's also an alternative to more harmful drugs like opioids and fentanyl. Here's why we need to be more cautious about cannabis legalization. The lack of regulations and quality control leads to inconsistent products and increased risks. The cannabis use has also been linked to major health impacts, as well as social dysfunction in communities with increased cannabis use. The gaps in how cannabis is regulated in the U.S. are major. For example, unregulated shops can pose major public health risk. Mislabeling, contamination, and quality of products. Contaminants like lead and mercury were also found in some cannabis products. There are many direct impact of cannabis use. Regular use can alter cognitive functions. It alters brain structures and particularly with memory and attention. Individual who are, using cannabis a lot have lower performance in executive functions, and that includes the ability to make decisions, remembering things, planning or organizing and solving problems, as well as they have a lower ability to control their emotions and behaviors. It's also linked to mental health issues like anxiety, depression, and even psychosis. There was a 220% increase in emergency room visits in Ontario, Canada, for cannabis-induced psychosis between 2014 to 2021. And cannabis also have lots of indirect impacts that we don't talk about. For example, cannabis-related accidents have increased by 475% from 2010 to 2021, according to Boston University. 12 million Americans, and with some under the age of 16, has also reported driving while under the influence of cannabis. And lastly, cannabis also can cause social dysfunctions. Excessive use can reduce energy levels, impact communication skills, shortening attention spans, and smoking weed has also become a common form of escapism, which has also contributed to the growing sense of loneliness in our younger generations. So what are the gaps? What needs to be done, but isn't being done? Lots of people being affected by cannabis lack access to support like family counseling, addiction services, specializing in cannabis addiction, and education on safe use of cannabis. Families often struggle to get the support they need and the resources to help, potentially one of their family members who are struggling with cannabis addiction. And the limited research on cannabis has also led to a lot of misinformation. Many people who are impacted felt that the risk of cannabis are being downplayed, and they were totally unprepared for when things goes wrong. So my vision for improvement in addressing cannabis use involves expanding access to critical services. First things first, let's stop misinformation and stop downplaying the negative impacts of cannabis. The growing use of cannabis, especially in young people, is leading to major consequences, and we need to address that as a society. Then we also need to increase resources for families, such as counseling and education to help them support their loved ones who are dealing with an addiction. There's also needs for more comprehensive services and educations on how to safely use cannabis. And that people need this kind of resources to make informed decisions. And my policy recommendations are obviously strengthening regulations, controlling the quality of cannabis on the market, test products for safety, make sure labels are clear so people know what they're getting into. If we have strict laws for alcohol and cigarettes, why should cannabis be any different? Cannabis attacks the human mind and spirits in so many ways, which I think makes it more dangerous and more needs to implement better regulations. Lastly, as a social worker, we need to empower those affected by the lack of services and support and advocate for their well-being, especially the low income and people of color who are disproportionately impacted by cannabis use and the abuse of the big corporations. This only increases social inequalities and continues the cycle of poverty and addiction. In conclusion, while cannabis may seem to be all the hype right now, we can't ignore the danger and the impact it has on our community. Through thoughtful policy advocacy, regulation of the markets, and increasing resources and support, we can reduce harm and create a safer and more informed society. Thank you.